Welcome, my gorgeous woman, to an episode of Lingerie and Lattes. I have an interesting concept to bring up to us today. If you don't know who I am Olivia Drumaga. I founded Vulcan Ability as a guide for monogamous couples to deepen their intimacy, build stronger connections between themselves, and set the foundation for a long-lasting relationship. All right. I have been studying these different subjects, whether it be the differences between men and women and how we interpret relationships, or our body responses are different. I have been looking into the history of intimacy and what the trends are and kind of how they have shaped our society. And I've noticed that we're currently in a state of the world where there's a lot of transient relationships. There's a lot of churn. Similar to a job place, it's almost within a 2 to 3 year time frame. People tend to reassess and usually jump ship. And while we have such an abundance of options and opportunities in front of us, we can start to analyze how do we approach these relationships and what's the difference between the way that you're showing up to a relationship, what you tolerate, and how another person can interpret the same experience. So what do I mean by this? If we think about a regular good childhood where the parents handled conflict in a very mild manner, temper. They sat down and discussed their differences. Perhaps they showed each other different lists of how they interpreted a problem. And then also had a lot of space and attention for the child to not feel that the child is the cause of the argument. Let's say that this ideal scenario exists. Both of those people have a certain threshold, and all of us individually have a certain threshold of relationship patterns and what we are willing to tolerate as the behavior of our partner. Now, what does this depend upon? To me, it really seems that a lot of it is driven with what have we already been normalized towards, what have we accepted as this is the way things are, and anything off of this point can be better. If we take that example of the perfect couple, the perfect scenario family, then each of those individual people, the man and the woman, would have a threshold of how people should behave during conflict. So if we expand on the example that I shared of two people coming together with their own lists of how they interpreted a problem and what they've learned from it, and have that be a conversation point, if that same person enters into a relationship or attempts to be in a relationship with another person who is emotionally unregulated and starts to yell or starts to cause a scene, starts to play the blame game, get defensive, they're not going to, first of all, really know how to speak to that to them, to their partners, and also they're not going to necessarily tolerate this because they know how it can be done in a relationship. And their expectation is going to be that the other person gets their emotions in order, comes back to them with their own insights so they can move forward into a resolution. Why do I share all of this? Because to me, it's extremely interesting to notice where everyone exists in their relationships and what their threshold is. Because once we start to experience growth and there's a discomfort in a relationship, that usually draws us to become better in some capacity. And when our partners are able to upkeep with the level of growth that we're expanding upon at the pace we're progressing, then we have a harmonious relationship because our thresholds are similar. If one person is way above their threshold, let's say that one person who is calm and collected throughout any conversations and arguments is constantly seeing this other person who just causes great scenes, let's say publicly as well, gets very loud and angry, that's not going to last very long because this threshold, it has been overfilled. And so that person is going to step away and usually take the corrective action to remove this toxic person from their lives. Now, that's a very clear-cut example with those two people, and obviously those were the good people, those were and the other person, the partner, was acting in a bad way. But there are so many nuances within relationships and what the moral code is of what how people should be treating each other, because it is so subjective. And this is why I want to share this. Because for one of us, as we want to show up to the world as great wives, great partners, great girlfriends, great friends for our besties, we want to make sure that our threshold isn't being brought into the conversation, because I might hear a certain behavior being played out in a relationship and think, wow, that would never fly for me. There is absolutely no way I could continue seeing a person if they behaved in X manner. Meanwhile, in my own life, I have a certain behavior pattern that I'm repeating, and a third person's perspective would say, wow, I would never want to deal with whatever she's dealing with. That would never fly for me. I would break up with that person in an instant. So, this is the curiosity that I have. What defines what we tolerate in a relationship? The best way, in my opinion, to unpack that is to start recognizing what are certain behaviors that I am okay with in a relationship. And perhaps starting to notice maybe there's a pattern of I'm okay if the person doesn't immediately respond back to me. Maybe I am completely fine with my partner taking up as much space as they need in order to get back to me in a calm, collected manner. Perhaps it's something different. Maybe you're noticing that you have given a lot of leeway for pushing back an argument. Let's say you are always requesting to have a certain conversation, and all of a sudden you're noticing that whenever you do have a certain subject to bring up to your partner and you want to expand on it more, it takes about a month of convincing and of constantly bringing something up in order for you to address that. And again, that is your threshold. You are okay with the delay of that, or perhaps not okay, but you have normalized the delay in response or the delay in addressing a conflict or whatever the situation is that's not necessarily the best within your relationship. There's a certain threshold that has said, I am going to accept this no matter how unhappy and unfulfilling this is feeling for me. When we start to recognize what we have endured in our childhood and what we have accepted as behavior between two grown-up adults, we can really start to assess whether the behavior that we have in our lives is mirroring that, and how can we adjust our expectations of our thresholds. Once you start to bring awareness to what that is, ask yourself, am I okay with that? Am I okay with giving as much leeway as they need in that space? Or am I overstepping my own boundaries in hopes that I am giving enough to my partner? Because that's where these thresholds come in from. That's why they exist in such a erratic manner, because we are only thinking that we're doing the best for ourselves and for our partners at the time. And again, a third person's perspective might be extremely clear cut, but they haven't walked in our shoes. So perhaps what you are experiencing is really terrible compared to the ideal, but compared to how you have been treated, perhaps this is the best you've ever had. And so for you, again, that threshold has now shifted into this level, this phase of your relationship. But if we start bringing in awareness and noticing, am I excited about where I am? Can I shift this somehow? We can start building another threshold. And if a partner is unable to grow with us, then naturally that will have to have a separation. As we conclude this week, take the weekend to yourself and really start reflecting, what are behaviors that I am tolerating in my relationship? How has my experience being growing up normalized certain behaviors in my romantic relationships that perhaps I now want to adapt? And perhaps now you want to bring in your own flavor, in your own changes, and perhaps set new boundaries and lower the threshold on certain behaviors, and have your partner respect those and so forth, and have his own thresholds be assessed. Perhaps you are acting in a way that are that may not be for the best. Bringing in this awareness to where we've come from, where we are right now, and where we want to go to in relationships is critical, because if we don't have this sort of 360 view and assessment every so often, we might start getting to feel stuck, or we might just be gliding along, coasting, but not necessarily being directed towards our vision. So take a moment and assess what your threshold is. Notice where you are okay with this and where you are not. And from there, be well. Thank you, my beautiful ladies. Speak with you all next week.